Hello, hello, and a warm welcome to Nestus by Academy once more. And today, this is going to be our first video on support and movement. And specifically, we are going to look at support in plants. Remember, this is the last topic that you need to complete for you to satisfactorily meet the demands of Kenya Certificate of Secondary Education for Biology course. So the main objectives of this video or this lesson is that by the end of it, you need to be able to define what support is. You need to be able to distinguish between movement and locomotion. You need to be able to describe the necessity of support in plants. Why do plants need support? And again, you need to be able to describe how plants usually attain support. And still, it's also very important that you be able to describe the various strengthening tissues we always find in plants. So when we talk about the word support, what comes to your mind? We talk about the word movement and locomotion. I know these are not new terms to you. We talked about these in Form 1, but when we talk about the word support, what comes to your mind? Now, when we talk about support, support refers to the ability of an organism to maintain its shape and bear its weight. If an organism is able to maintain its shape and bear its weight comfortably, then the organism is said to have good support. Assuming I come across a plant that is of upright stature, ideally plants are always expected to maintain, to have that upright state. For example, that if I was to come across a plant that is not having that, let me say I come across a plant that is falling and it's not having its upright stature, I will say that this one has got support, but I will say that this one is lacking support. And just like if I was to be able to move comfortably without using a walking stick or holding myself against the wall for me to stabilize myself, I will be saying I'm having good support. But if I am not able to walk on my own, people have to help me walk, then I will say I'm lacking support. Movement, as we defined earlier in Form 1, simply refers to the change in position of a part or parts of an organism. When an organism changes position of its parts or parts of its body, that constitutes movement. Locomotion, on the other hand, describes the change in position of an entire organism from one place to another. So locomotion is essentially a type or a form of movement. And remember that while plants can only move parts of their bodies, animals can always locomote because they can move their entire bodies from one position to another. Now, why is it important for animals to locomote? What is the importance of locomotion to animals? If you can recall, in Form 1, we discussed that locomotion was important because it enables animals to locate food. It was also very important because it will enable organisms to locate mates. And of course, locomotion becomes very important because it enables organisms to escape harmful stimuli or to seek more favorable stimuli. Because organisms always live in environments which are constantly changing. It can be warm and cozy one moment, and then all of a sudden, it starts raining immensely, and therefore an organism has to seek for favorable stimuli or has to escape that harmful stimuli, and locomotion makes that possible. So plants, on the other hand, they're not able to locomote. But how do they compensate for this inability? How do they compensate for this inability to locomote? That to understand that, it's simple. We need to ask ourselves, what do animals achieve by locomotion? And in retrospection, how do plants achieve those needs? So plants usually compensate for their inability to locomote in the sense that they have the ability to manufacture their own food through photosynthesis. So because they have the ability to manufacture their own food, they do not need to move from one point to another. We have always seen also animals moving from one point to another in search of water. But for plants, using their roots, they're always able to absorb localized nutrients and water from the soil. So that means they don't have to move from one point to another, looking for nutrients, looking for water. And of course, plants also have got tropic responses, which they always use to respond to stimuli. From what we learned previously in the previous topic, through tropic responses, the plants are able to bend their parts and carve away from harmful stimuli or towards favorable stimuli. So that way they don't necessarily need to locomote to enable them respond effectively to the environment. And of course, plants usually have pollination mechanisms that are not dependent on locomotion. Like a good number of plants have got their flowers being pollinated by wind or being pollinated by insects. So they don't need to essentially move from one point to another for them to be able to achieve, to ensure reproduction. So these mechanisms ensures that they ensure that plants are always able to compensate for their inability to locomote. So why do plants need support? Why do plants need support? Plants need support for a number of reasons. One, plants always need support to enable them expose their leaves for maximum absorption of light energy for photosynthesis. If a plant is upright, then all its leaves will be well exposed to trap maximum sunlight for photosynthesis. This is in sharp contrast to a plant that, let me say, lacks support and has fallen. So if a plant lacks support and has fallen in this state, only the leaves on this end will be exposed to sunlight. But there are so many other plants, other plant leaves down here that will not be able to trap light energy, and therefore the process of photosynthesis will be impaired significantly in a plant that lacks support. The upright stature or the support framework also enables the plants to expose their flowers effectively to agents of pollination. So when the plant is having an upright posture, if it's having adequate support framework, the flowers are well exposed, so the insects can easily spot them and pollinate them. Wind can easily blow away the pollen grains to ensure pollination and reproduction there. At the same time, also, a good support framework in a plant ensures that the fruits are well exposed for the dispersal agents, and this ensures that the plants are able to reproduce effectively. And again, remember, plants are not alone in their settings. We have animals that occasionally rub themselves against the plants. We have the monkeys that will always want to jump from one branch to another. A good support framework in a plant ensures that the plant is able to withstand such external forces, such as winds and animals in their habitats. So support becomes a very, very important aspect in plants if plants are able to meet their physiological needs in an effective way. So having seen the importance of support in plants, the next question we need to ask ourselves is this: how do plants attain support? How will the plants achieve support? So based on mechanisms of attaining support, plants can always be broadly categorized into two classes. We have what we call herbaceous plants and we have what we call woody plants. What's the difference between these two types of plants? You must have encountered the term herbaceous plants way back in Form 1. What do you remember? What do you mean by herbaceous plants? Now, herbaceous plants are essentially those plants with weak and flexible stems and tissues. The tissues in these plants are always weak and flexible. For example, you can easily bend the stem of a blackjack, right? Stem of a blackjack, you can easily bend that. How about a huge mature mango tree or a huge mature mugumo tree or baobab? Can you bend that? Obviously not, you can't. So the plants which are having weak and flexible stems and tissues are always known as herbaceous plants. Now, how do herbaceous plants achieve support? Herbaceous plants usually achieve support through three main ways. One is through turgidity of the cells through osmosis. If you can remember, when you're looking at osmosis in Form 1, and you're looking at the significance of osmosis in living things, we listed that osmosis plays a role in ensuring support in herbaceous plants. Yes, it's time to review and reflect on that one today. At the same time, also, the herbaceous plants can sometimes attain support through twining themselves around hard objects. And take note, it is twining around hard objects. It's not just twining around anything. If a herbaceous plant was to twine itself around a soft object, it might not achieve the support it needs. And again, take note that it is twining, it is not twinning. Sometimes we meet this a lot in exams. This one is not twining. This one is an aspect of giving birth to twins, and plants are not going to achieve support by giving rise to twins. We can also have the herbaceous plants attaining support through use of tendrils or even spikes and thorns in some. But these are related because through either ways, they use these ones on hard objects. So to explain this further, if you can recall the structure of a plant stem or plant roots, you always know beyond the epidermis, we always have the cortex. The cortex has got a tissue of cells known as parenchyma. So these parenchyma cells, when they absorb water by osmosis, the cells stress and then they become firm or they become turgid. So the collective turgidity of these cells make the plants to be able to stand upright, giving them the necessary support they need. And this explains why plants tend to droop on a very hot day. This is because on very hot days, due to high rate of transpiration, the plants lose more water than they absorb. So on very hot days, the cells will lose their turgidity, and then the cells become plasmolized and flabby. They become less firm. So as a result of that one, the plant droop. So when a plant is drooped, it lacks sufficient support. Then at the same time also, herbaceous plants can always obtain support through twining themselves around hard objects, as we have stated earlier. I believe you can recall thigmotropism or aptotropism from the previous topic of reception, response, and coordination. Yes, so some herbaceous plants will always attain support simply by twining themselves around the hard objects. And this can be other woody plants with hard stems, or it can be on non-plants. I believe that sometimes you have seen some of these plants with weak stems twining themselves around barbed wires or wire mesh until they're able to expose their leaves towards sunlight. At the same time, some plants also simply twine themselves around hard objects using their stems or some plants can also use tendrils instead of the whole plant stem. So sometimes you also have those structures becoming very handy to the herbaceous plants. Now, when we talk about woody plants, these ones are plants which have got very hard stems at maturity, and they're made up of non-flexible tissues. However, you need to note that when they are young, they still tend to be herbaceous in nature. For example, while I said earlier that it is obviously impossible for you to bend the stem of a mature huge mango tree, when it is still at the seedling stage, you can still bend its tissues, because usually even the woody plants, when they are very young, they still always tend to be herbaceous in nature. So in woody plants, they always attain support through strengthening tissues that are always deposited in them. And majorly, the woody plants attain support through three main strengthening tissues we always find in these plants. We have the collenchyma tissue, we have sclerenchyma, and we have the xylem tissue. Yes, when you're in Form 2, you remember, when you're looking at the xylem tissue, we said the xylem performs two main critical roles in a plant. It performs the role of conducting water from the roots to the other parts of the plant. But apart from that, the xylem also plays a critical role in support. The collenchyma tissue is made up of cells which contain cellulose as a strengthening substance. Most of these strengthening tissues, they must possess a substance which gives them strength. And cellulose is a complex polysaccharide which tends to be very firm. It's quite rigid, so that enables the cells which contain it to have firm support. So the collenchyma, the cells are always living at maturity, and they are very, very important in providing tensile support to the plants. So the illustration below is showing showing the composition of the collenchyma cells. This is one cell extracted from here. You can tell it is cylindrical, and it has got a cylindrical outlook. At the corners of the cells, we always have deposits of cellulose. So cellulose is always mainly deposited at the corners for the case of the collenchyma tissues, and they become very important so they're found deposited all through, even downwards. They become important in providing strength to the plants as they grow. Then we also have sclerenchyma. Sclerenchyma cells also are specialized for support, but unlike collenchyma cells, the sclerenchyma cells are always dead at maturity. And with them, the main strengthening substance is lignin, and they also perform a critical role in providing mechanical support. And again, unlike collenchyma, where if you recall, when you're looking at collenchyma cells, we said the strengthening tissue is cellulose. And for collenchyma, we are finding that cellulose was only largely deposited at the corners of the cells. But for the case of sclerenchyma, the main strengthening tissue is lignin, and it is always deposited in the lumen, so that now throughout the cell, so that now the lumen of the cell, the sclerenchyma cell, becomes smaller compared to the deposition of the lignin. So sometimes when these are drawn for you and you are supposed to identify them, this is always a critical thing to look at. When you find there is deposition of the substance, the strengthening substance, only at the corners, then that one is denoting collenchyma. But when you find we have deposition across the diameter, across the cytoplasm, with there remaining only a very small lumen there, then that one is sclerenchyma. And again, take note strongly that the strengthening tissue in collenchyma is cellulose, but the main strengthening tissue in sclerenchyma is lignin. The xylem tissues are also important in providing support to the plants, and this is because their walls are also lignified. And if you're keen on looking at the adaptations of xylem, one adaptation we're seeing is that their walls are lignified to provide support, or lignified to prevent them from collapsing. So, and if you can recall, we talked of different lignification patterns. You might want to go back to review your Form 2 content to try and remember them. This clarification, the pitted, the spiral pattern. So the main strengthening tissue in xylem is lignin. Again, that is very important to note. And again, remember, you might also want to recall the distribution of the vascular bundles in the stems and roots of monocots and dicots, because again, it's another very critical and crucial a learning point. Remember the need for you to be able to identify xylem and phloem. This one is in dicots, and in dicots we said the xylem is centrally placed and it is star-shaped. Then we have the phloem found between the rays. But for the case of the dicot stem, you are having the vascular bundles arranged in a ring with the phloem to the outside and xylem to the inside. And again, also important to note was the presence of the vascular cambium in the case of the dicot stems. For the case of the monocot roots, again, the vascular bundles are arranged in a ring, and there is presence of a pith there. And you can see, so here is the xylem, and then we have the phloem there. And again, coming over to the stem, remember in the stem, we have the vascular bundles arranged in a scattered way. So they are scattered, they're not arranged in any particular pattern. So you might want to go back to Form 2 again and review on the tissues of the stem and the tissues of the roots and the various roles that they play. So in summary, we have three main strengthening tissues contributing to support in woody plants. We have the collenchyma, we have sclerenchyma, and we have the xylem. And the key thing is to note is what are the strengthening substances or chemicals or compounds they always contain within them. What gives them that strength they need to support the shape and the upright stature of the plants. So while we are talking about support in herbaceous plants and support in woody plants, you should also note that even the leaves themselves, they also need to be able to maintain their shape and be well exposed to sunlight. Leaves which are rolled up can also significantly impair the process of photosynthesis. So we also always expect leaves to be able to be held in a flat manner and well exposed to sunlight. So we can also ask you to state the various ways through which leaves attain support, and take note that leaves always attain support through turgidity of the spongy mesophyll cells. Where the cells take up water by osmosis, they become turgid, and that turgidity, the collective turgidity of these spongy mesophyll cells contributes to support in these leaves. The rigid petiole we find in a leaf is also very important in exposing it well to sunlight. And also, of course, the rigidity of the cellulose cell walls also performs a critical role in supporting the leaves. And also, of course, remember with the venation patterns, the veins you see in a plant leaf are basically made up of the vascular tissues where we have the xylem tissues which are lignified. So the extensive network of xylem tissues will also contribute to adequate support in the leaves. With that being said, there's need for you to be able to know a very common practical aspect you can always be tested on here. A very common practical you're likely to meet in your examinations is where you are expected to observe distribution of vascular bundles in either monocots or dicots. And sometimes this can be done by giving you a leaf or a young stem, and a scalpel can give you a magnifying lens and then iodine solution used as a staining agent there. So using the scalpel, you might be required to cut off thin sections from here. And then when you cut a thin section there, if you place it on a planar surface, like on a white tile, it gives you a cylindrical outlook like that. And you will then add iodine solution to act as a stain. And then using the magnifying lens, you are supposed to observe through. So of course, you'll be observing the distribution of vascular bundles there. And then you might be required to make illustrations or drawings of the same. That is if you are making transverse section. You might also sometimes be required to make a longitudinal section where you are cutting in a longitudinal way, assuming this is the piece of the petiole. Then if we do a longitudinal cut also, of course, in the longitudinal cut, also using the magnifying lens, you can still make your observations and make your drawings. We expect that you will be having to be able to make illustrations of the xylem, phloem, or basically the vascular bundles. You need to be able to make them. But what are the key learning points here you need to note? Most of the times when you are using the magnifying lens or even the microscope, most of the cases, sometimes the magnification power might be so low, you might not be able to actually see phloem and xylem independently. That means the examiner's expectations would always be that you only draw and represent the vascular bundles. Do not bring in the cambium, because sometimes the magnifying power might be so low you're not able to see that. So a student who draws this will be able to score maximally, but a student who draws this and brings in the vascular cambium in a case where the magnification power is too low and cannot be seen, will be losing marks here because of that. And again, remember, always when drawing, one of the fundamental rules of drawing biology illustrations is that we always need to have smooth, continuous diagrams. When the diagrams are having discontinuities like what you see here, it can decimate your marks, and you might end up scoring less than you could actually score. So in summary, the key takeaway from this lesson are that one, you need to be able to define what support is. You need to be able to distinguish between movement and locomotion. There is need for you to be able to describe the importance of locomotion to animals. And again, ask yourself, are you able to state the ways in which plants compensate for their inability to locomote? And what are the ways in which support is important to plants? And if we are to ask you to state 2 ways in which herbaceous plants attain support, you need to be able to know them. And again, what are the strengthening tissues in woody plants, and what gives them the strength they need to give these plants support? So thank you so much for staying with me through. Until the next lesson, bye-bye. In the next lesson, we'll be looking at support and movement in animals. See you in the next.